This is the one in which I give you one more reminder about the most important election you've probably never heard of, and tell you how much fun I had canvassing for it, even in 17-degree weather. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe, and enjoy the video. So this past weekend, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, canvassing with two organizations, one of which is called Progress Libs, and the other one which is called Progressive Victory 2022, though I think they probably need to update to Progressive Victory 2023. That's the organization affiliated with Vosh, and Progress Libs is the one I've worked with in the past. It's led by Femboy Maths on Twitter, aka Maya, a very young, very successful trans activist in the North Carolina area, and her ambitions are swelling, and she is going across states helping Democrats win elections. I decided to participate in the Wisconsin election, the Supreme Court election. We did a video about it because I was successfully persuaded that this is one of, if not the, most important statewide elections in recent memory. It's kind of atypical because it's not for, it's not a state gubernatorial race where you're electing a governor. It's not even, a state Senate race or a state like legislature race, right? This is the state Supreme Court. Wisconsin's a bit different because they elect their Supreme Court justices, all 7 of them, by popular vote. We're used to the federal Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the United States, in which justices, 9 of them, are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And they're not term limited, right? So, a Supreme Court justice of the United States Supreme Court, they serve until they retire or they die, or the incredibly unlikely event that they are successfully impeached, which is possible, but it's never been done. In Wisconsin, it's different. You have 7 Supreme Court justices. They're popularly elected, and they serve 10-year terms, which are pretty long terms. And right now, you have a conservative justice who has declined to seek another term. And right now, that means that the court is split 50-50. There are 3 liberal justices and 3 conservative justices, and the 4th, the one who is no longer running, is a conservative justice. So this is an opportunity for Wisconsin to flip its Supreme Court towards the left, which would be very good for everybody on the left in Wisconsin, and I would argue for the vast majority of people on the right, since the left are just simply better at governing than their conservative counterparts. Now, Wisconsin's pretty interesting because it's a battleground state. Every presidential election you've ever followed, Wisconsin's in competition constantly. In 2008 and 2012, Wisconsin flipped for President Obama. In 2016, famously, they flipped for Donald Trump. And then in 2020, they supported Joe Biden. Wisconsin has 10 electoral college votes. It's a pretty big deal. And you could theoretically conceive of a situation where those 10 electoral votes could be the decider as to who becomes the President of the United States. And in 2020, after President Biden, or then Joe Biden, right, won Wisconsin, then President Trump attempted to steal Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes away from Joe Biden by filing lawsuits up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. President Trump tried to disqualify 221,000 Wisconsin ballots, arguing that the only reason that those ballots counted were because of pandemic-related restrictions and considerations and accommodations. And 3 of the conservative justices agreed. They were prepared to disqualify 221,000 Wisconsin ballots, which would have allowed President Trump to basically steal back the 10 electoral votes that lawfully, rationally went to Joe Biden. And obviously the 3 liberal justices opposed it. And 1 conservative justice flipped. He had an attack of conscience. He recognized that this was a pretty transparent and legally baseless attempt by the Trump administration to just steal, victory from the jaws of defeat. And he sided with the liberal justices. And so on a decision 4-3, Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected President Trump's claim those 10 electoral votes continue to go to Joe Biden. Now, Wisconsin was also a predicate for President Trump to try to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. He cited Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as examples, trying to get the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene on his behalf, saying, look, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, states like these, they're allowing ballots that may or may not have been allowed in a non-pandemic year, to be counted for my opponent. The United States Supreme Court was also unconvinced, including the 6-3 regressive supermajority on the Supreme Court, and they declined to hear it. But the bottom line is those 10 electoral ballots in Wisconsin could have easily gone to Donald Trump. He could have successfully stolen them from Joe Biden and disqualified the voices of 221,000 Wisconsinites if the conservative Justice Brian Hagedorn, I think it was his name, had decided to vote with his colleagues. So basically, if you get that court, if you get the right conservatives on that court, it could become a very fascistic, anti-democratic institution. The guy who's currently running, the conservative judge who's currently running to replace Patricia Rocket, I can't remember her last name, but the outgoing conservative justice, the conservative judge who's campaigning to take her spot, his name is Daniel Kelly, and he was a Wisconsin Supreme Court justice from like 2016 to 2020. He was put in to fill a vacancy by the then Republican governor of Wisconsin. So he was on the Wisconsin Supreme Court for 4 years. And this guy is corrupt and shady as hell. In addition to not recusing himself from court cases, and at least 6 court cases in which organizations that he was affiliated with directly were litigants or participants or affiliated with these court cases that came before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, instead of recusing himself, instead of saying, listen, I have connections to these groups, I can't impartially adjudicate, I need to take myself off these cases, he still presided over them on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and he voted in all 6 instances in favor of the organizations with which he had direct ties. He tried to run for a full term, because again, this was a vacancy. He finished 4 years of somebody else's term. Then he ran in 2020 for a full 10-year term, and he lost. And then during that time, according to the House of Representatives Select January 6th Committee, when they were investigating the January 6th insurrection, he actively participated. He was paid $120,000 by Wisconsin Republicans to advise them on a scheme to send fake, fraudulent electors to Washington, D.C. to steal those 10 electoral ballots from Wisconsin that way. So this man is sympathetic to the idea that the Republicans should just be able to steal the outcome of elections they don't like. He's also equated, abortion to murder. He said that affirmative action and slavery have the same racial taproot, the same discriminatory taproot. So basically, affirmative action is as racist and bigoted as slavery. This man has some crazy radical views. His opponent, Janet Protasevich, is the liberal choice. She was a former assistant district attorney. She was a former prosecutor. She's a circuit court judge in Wisconsin. And the only position she's made clear is that she supports a woman's right to choose. Based on all available evidence, she is the much more rational, much more democratic, and I mean not Democratic Party, but like just, rule of law, the rule of the majority. She is much more in favor of that than someone like Daniel Kelly. So it's imperative that we keep this guy out of office. Wisconsin is a split state. Again, they voted for Democrats in the past. They voted for Republicans. According to polling, 42% of the public leans left, 42% of the public leans right. You have 16% that's undecided. But you've got a gerrymandered state that is disproportionately beneficial towards the Republican Party. Right now, the 2 chambers of the Wisconsin state legislature are so close to a Republican supermajority because 10 years ago they redrew the maps. They were in a position to redraw the maps, and instead of having fairly balanced maps that allowed for a competitive Senate, competitive assembly, they took the opportunity, drew the maps, which gave them a huge advantage in Wisconsin. So even though the state is roughly 50-50 in terms of how voters identify and in terms of the population, Republicans have an outsized advantage because they bent the rules to favor them. And it was a close election in 2022 between the Democrats and Republicans for governor. And so this is a huge opportunity to kind of rebalance the Wisconsin government because, again, you have very close, I think they're 1 vote away from the Senate and a couple of seats away. They do have a supermajority in the state Senate, and they're like 3 seats away from having a supermajority in the state assembly, which is the other chamber of the Wisconsin legislature. And if they had that supermajority, they'd be able to override any Democratic governor. Republicans maximize. They do everything in their power to exploit and to maximize and to increase their systemic advantages. And when it comes to the Wisconsin legislature, they've got it. This next Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court, will probably see cases about abortion, right? Because now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, there's like an 1849 law in Wisconsin that criminalizes abortion, including criminalizing those who offer abortion services and could potentially criminalize those who seek them out. It's incredibly draconian anti-abortion law going back to the 19th century. Right now, the Democratic governor of Wisconsin, Governor Evers, and his attorney general, they said they're not going to enforce the law. But the lawsuits going on between the Democratic governor and more conservative-leaning, district attorneys in the state that could make their way to the Supreme Court. So whoever fills the Supreme Court vacancy could be the vote which decides whether or not a woman and her physician are punished, criminalized, jailed for seeking or providing abortion. There are also cases that are likely to be heard about the state's gerrymandering, right? Because as I said, Wisconsin is heavily gerrymandered towards the Republican Party. They have a colossal outsized advantage because of, again, it's just wildly out of step with how the state identifies. The government should be relatively 50-50. And it's not, certainly not the legislature. They have rewritten the rules, redrawn the maps in order to give themselves as close to a permanent supermajority advantage as possible. The conservative Wisconsin Supreme Court isn't interested in changing that. They're fine with it. But if Janet Protasevich wins this election and she becomes the 7th Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, if a gerrymander case becomes before her, that could very easily change, and the Wisconsin voting maps could be redrawn to become more balanced. So there are very real stakes in terms of not just the country, right? Because again, if they attempted to steal Wisconsin's electoral votes in 2020 twice, I see no reason why they won't try to do it in 2024. The Republican Party has no limiting principle, and we've talked about this in multiple videos. We have no evidence that they learned their lesson and say, you know what, we went too far there. My bad. We shouldn't have done that. I apologize. And excise and exile those in the party who put them there. They haven't abandoned Trump. They haven't abandoned Stephen Miller. They haven't abandoned Ron DeSantis, whoever else. There's no shame there. There's no sense of self-accountability. So the only way to stop these regressive, fascistic conservatives in the Republican Party, the Republican leaders, is to stop them because they won't stop themselves. And so electing Judge Protasevich will go a long way towards doing that in Wisconsin, and through Wisconsin, it will have national implications. And finally, I'll say I really enjoyed my time canvassing. I did say on Twitter it was a bit brisk this morning, door-to-door canvassing in Wisconsin when it was 17 degrees near Milwaukee. It was very cold. But Progress Libs and Progressive Victory had a great setup. They had a great group of canvassers. There were streamers there like Sansol, who I didn't get a chance to meet, but Cherry was there. Members of Destiny's community. During a stream, I think it was the Saturday night I was there, we got to have a conversation with Riverboat Jack, and Vosh was there, and I think Sock Dunn left, and stuff like that. So it was great for outreach. And despite the cold and the travel, it was a lot of fun. You feel involved, you feel committed, you feel invested, you feel like you've done more than just talk. You've gotten out and actually knocked on doors, and even people who are traditionally introverts, because I'm an extrovert by nature, but there were members of that canvassing group. If you asked them, they would tell you, I never thought I would have done something like this. I can't imagine ever going and knocking on doors and asking strangers to come out and vote and offering them information and things like that. But they did because they felt inspired to do it. And so it was made relatively easy for those who thought that it would never be easy, that it would be the hardest thing in the world. It was pretty easy. It was pretty fun. And for the most part, people were pretty chill. As a matter of fact, the best encounter I had was with a Republican man. So he was listed on our curated list as a Republican. As a Democratic household. Well, it turns out his wife is the Democrat, right? But he was the one who answered the door. And when he answered the door, I was like, I reminded him, like, hey, there's this extremely important election coming up about the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And he said, without batting an eye, he goes, yep, I know. And I'm going out to vote for Daniel Kelly. And it took me off guard. I was like, was like, well, that's one option. Have you considered Judge Protasevich? And so we had a really spirited back and forth. It was really funny. He was like, my wife is the Democrat. She's not here right now. She's as far left as I am far right. And I was like, well, I said, that must make for a pretty animated, household, pretty interesting house. And he goes, makes for really exciting arguments. And I was like, well, I feel like no matter what your position is, because your wife, you lose. And he said, yeah, I lose every time. And so we had a really good back and forth. We shook hands. We politely wished the other one's, person loses and stuff like that. So it wasn't like, hey, I wish you the best. It's like, hey, with all due respect, hope you lose on April 4th. And it was really nice. It was really civil. That's the kind of interactions you can expect around here. And then the other thing I'll do is just remind everybody that I can't zoom in on this, but basically early in-person voting ends April 2nd. The election day itself is April 4th, Tuesday, April 4th. You can return your absentee ballot by then, by 8 p.m. on April 4th. You can request an absentee ballot up to March 23rd, so you have about 8 days to do it as of this recording. And then again, election day is Tuesday, April 4th. This is, without question, the most important election you've probably never heard of, and it's incumbent on us to make sure people hear of it. Okay? So with that in mind, get out, vote blue-ish, and in this case, that is Judge Janet Protasevich. She might be democracy's best hope. Hey, you! Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. And if you absolutely hated the video, the best revenge for you is also to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. That'll teach me. If you want to share an opinion or share some feedback, go ahead and leave a comment, all right? 2023 is a year of change, hence the aggressive rebrand and commitment to new content. Inspired by my friends Luke Beasley and STV Philly, my personal goal for this channel is to hit 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So I'm hoping you'll do me a solid by spreading the word and the videos to potential fans and hate watchers alike. And in the meantime, we'll be pondering politics again with you very soon.